It's not unusual for new academic writers to confuse some different ways of using a text that they want to draw from. So this is a little tutorial that we want to talk about quotations, paraphrases, and allusions, just so you get a sense of this. I'm also going to show you how to build a paragraph that's basically good academic prose, and then you can build on that paragraph for your own creativity and research once you get a real good sense of how to build this paragraph. Okay, now what I'm going to use is the document They Came for the Children, which you can find free online. This is the report by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada based on the study of residential schools. Residential schools were a policy from the late 19th century through to almost the end of the 20th century, about 125 years, where Aboriginal, First Nation, Native children were forced out of their home at age 5, 6, 7, or 8, depending on the time and the context. And they were made to go to British-style and then Canadian-styled residential schools, sometimes all year long, sometimes just for 9 or 10 months a year, where they were forced to lose their languages, their native languages. They were forced to learn a new way of being civilized in the way of the policy of the day. The policy name was actually to kill the Indian to save the child. And it was a terrible system. But even more than the terrible system is that it was mostly churches that ran the schools, not totally, but mostly, and they did a terrible job. And there's thousands of stories of abuse, spiritual abuse, psychological abuse, but also really cruel physical abuse and a lot of sexual abuse. It's a terrible, terrible story in Canadian history, and some other countries in the world have this history from Britain and other countries colonizing their local areas. Okay, so students are going to do a project in this area, and basically the paper that I haven't written but that I'm imagining is talking about a bunch of different things that are pretty terrible. And this is but there is something else going on in the story, and I'm taking this from a section, and I'm going to go to page 49 here, and this section is just before the resistance section, where people say, I don't want to do this again. And it's a section basically that looks at when there were some exceptions, where there were a couple of cases or a handful of cases where things weren't bad. Now there may be more stories than this, but the document itself captures a couple. The point is actually more to watch how I use these last two paragraphs of this section, where I talk, it moves on to then resistance against cruelty. How I use this section here, where it talks about the Roman Catholic College, Grandin College, which was not a bad model. It actually worked in a lot of cases, and it was also a fairly recent model, only about 60 years ago. And so what I've done is I've begun my paragraph with a topic statement. This is a sentence. In this case, it's a little bit complex and could be a little better, but it's a sentence that captures what's going on in the rest of the paper and then what this passage is about, this one paragraph. While the fundamental concept of snatching children from their homes to have them re-educated and civilized in Canadian residential schools is itself a kind of harm, i.e. that's the rest of my argument, not every student experience was negative. One small part, okay, so that's my topic sentence, that's my statement. Then I say here, one small part of the residential school legacy is when the efforts of school administrators and teachers in particular schools led to some healthy student. That should be outcomes, not incomes, okay? And so what we have here is me actually paraphrasing the individual student's ability to succeed within the residential school system and positive difference. So I'm actually paraphrasing what they say there. So a paraphrase is when you take something specific that was said and you use your own words to say it. Now my words are actually quite different than those words there. But this is a reference to the whole. And then I've also referenced it here because it doesn't matter if it's a quotation, a paraphrase, or an allusion. You actually need to reference the entire thing. And then I have here, again, according to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada report, They Came for the Children, this report here, Grandin College in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories positively shaped the individual student's ability to succeed. In this case, I actually just captured a small amount of the passage, and I still need to put it in quotation marks. So that's a small quote. And so I put it in quotation marks. And I have the page number here. I'm using MLA system, but I don't need the title or the author because it's already mentioned in that sentence. And then I do some allusion here. This Roman Catholic Institute, begun in 1960, was designed to help Aboriginal students prepare to be priests and nuns. So this is an allusion to the whole passage. It's not a particular paraphrase of one sentence. It just goes back and hints at everything that was said in the passage. But I still have to reference it. Okay. And then I have a longer quotation. Because of its design and the intention of the leaders to succeed, student experience was different at Grandin College. And then I do this quotation from Ethel, Blund, and Andrew, and you can see that it lines up with this passage here. Okay. Now, so I've quoted that. I've set it off. It's not really quite long enough for a block quotation, but just to give you an example of what a block quotation looks like in MLA, I've blocked it off and quoted it. I put the reference number here, but I also put it quoted from the original piece, so where the original quotation was, because if you see there's a footnote here, if you actually follow that footnote to the end of the section, the end of the book, it will give you the place where it was originally discovered. And it's academic honesty to not just quote what you see in front of you, but if they're quoting somebody else, to help your reader get back to that original quote. And then I give some analysis, right? So what I've done is I've given the topic statement above, the very first statement. I've given a series of bits of evidence, and now I'm going to start to do analysis. As a result, a number of the leaders in the North came from Grandin College, including premiers, ministers, language commissioners, and more than one Dene Nation president. This is a paraphrase. I've basically taken an entire section of the paper right here, and I've actually used my own words to say what they said. So there's a mixing of things there. I'm basically taking it and rephrasing it. That's a paraphrase. I still need to reference it, and then we also give where that original reference came from because they've done so themselves. So see Van Camp 169. And then finally, I give an analysis statement here. While survivors of Indian residential schools in Canada tell stories that are overwhelmingly negative, and it does not excuse the fundamental flaw of the policy and compassion, there were some bright spots within the dark shadows of Canadian history. Okay, so that is, it's not a terribly great paragraph, but that's a good undergraduate level academic paragraph. It's got the 3 sections that we want to see in a paragraph: a topical statement, the evidence, and then some sort of analysis that I provide at the end for what the evidence means. It connects to the rest of the paper at the beginning and end of the paragraph. It's in MLA format, but in particular, it really captures the 3 things that we want. A quotation is where you use the exact words of the person or the people that you're quoting from. The book, it could be a TV show, it could be a song, anything that you're quoting, a tweet, it's the exact words. And then they're properly referenced here. If it's a short amount of text, you do it in line with the rest of the text. If it's longer, you set it off in a block text in MLA. I also did a couple of paraphrases. This is where I take a line or two and I give it my own words, but say basically the same thing. And I also have done an allusion, where I just talk about what generally is happening in this document. Those 3 things all have to be referenced because every fact, idea, figure, or set of words that are taken from any source, you need to reference them. That's the basic rule of academic honesty. Now you do that not just to not fail your paper or not be called out for plagiarism in a local magazine or something. You do it because it's honest, because it's a way of showing your work. And when you do this well, you communicate to your professor, you communicate to your editor that you think the material matters and you're willing to treat it with respect, that you can write professionally, and for all your readers, you communicate that you're trustworthy. And that's really key, because academic prose is about writing with power to convince people of what it is that you've discovered in your research. And that can be pretty exciting. So give this a try. Quotation, paraphrase, allusion. I hope this tutorial has helped you. And if you have any questions, make sure you add them in the comments or send me an email, bdickison@upei.ca.